like, that's a lot of like presence if I can cause everybody to stop talking. Okay, I think we're just waiting for a few seconds and we'll get started. Okay. Mino Gajep, it is a good morning. Miigwech, everyone, tout le monde, Kinagoa. We're so happy that you're able to join us today. And it's my honor to welcome you to the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation Symposium. We have come together in the spirit of remembrance, acknowledging, and continued learning of the shared history that we have in terms of residential schools, while we are continuing to work toward that truth so that we all have that truth knowledge and reconciliation. Today is not only a day about remembrance, but it's about commitment, a commitment to listening to and to hearing with our hearts that truth, to understanding and to creating pathways of respect and healing between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people across this land. So before we begin today, I'd like to take a moment to welcome several guests who are joining us today. Susan Manitowabi, Anishinaabe Monokamis from Whitefish First Nation, whose wisdom continues to guide us on this journey. Atikmashing Anishinaabe Councillor Cheryl Miller-Martin, welcome, whose presence here underscores the importance of dialogue and partnership. Dr. Lynn Wells and Dr. Malcolm Campbell, who are championing First Nation, Inuit, and Métis inclusion and education in meaningful ways. Roxanne Manitowabi, Chair of LUNEC, whose leadership and advocacy are vital in advancing reconciliation. Kimberly Murray, National Scholar, Queen's University, who tirelessly promotes reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, as well as advocating for Indigenous communities. We'd like to acknowledge Tammy Eager, whose presence here today supports Mamozing at Laurentian University. Sylvie Lafontaine, who makes all this happen in terms of space and ability to have functions like this. So we are truly honored by all of your presence here today with us. And we appreciate the time you've taken to join us today. To everyone gathered here today, thank you for being an important part of this conversation. And we hope that today's symposium inspires us all to continue the work of reconciliation with humility, courage, and most importantly, open hearts. Chimigwech, thank you, merci. I'd like to now introduce Roxanne Manitowabi as our, First, I would like to have Pasqua come and do an opening song for us. I was just gonna plow right through this.
Minokajip, my name is Pasqua Lightning, and this morning I'll be singing a song that was taught to me by Rob Spade, and it's praying that everyone is protected today and that we have a good day, and we are praying to the great white buffalo, great white wolf spirit.
Miigwech Pasqua. Now I invite Dr. Susan Manitowobi to come and open us with prayer.
Ani bojo, chirmokwe deshnikas wigwaskinika denjaba makwa dodem nishnabe kwendao. My name is Squirrel Woman. My English name is Susan Manitowobi, and I'm from Whitefish River First Nation. I'm Bear Clan. And I just want to warn you that usually when I get up and speak, my phone happens to go off. So please forgive me ahead of time if that happens, because I forget to turn it off. So these days I just wait for it to ring. Anyway, I'm so happy to be here today and come from Manitowoc this morning. And it was a beautiful ride in, beautiful sunrise, and had the chance to think about today, this National Truth and Reconciliation Day. And a little known fact, or maybe a well-known fact, is that it's been 10 years since the Truth and Reconciliation final report was handed down, and it's been 5 years since the unmarked graves were found at the residential school in BC. And so, I think about all of those things, and I think about all of the children that have gone through those residential schools, the ones that came through and continue on, and their legacy and the impacts that it has on their families. But I also think about those people, those young souls that never made it out of there. And so it's a time to think about all of those kinds of things, and where are we today in terms of truth and reconciliation, and what is our responsibility to that. And so when I walked into this room this morning, I was so happy to see everybody here, and I was so happy to see so many orange shirts, to commemorate all of those people that have gone to residential schools. And I think everybody's been touched in one way or another by residential school. My family, for example, my mom went and my aunties went, and their stories are very sometimes hard to listen to. And it really explains how we got to be where we are today and how we behave today. So I want people to keep that in the backs of their minds, all of the impacts that this has had. In some ways it's good, in some ways it's not so good. But that's life. Life is good and life is not good. And we deal with what we have. And I'm going to say a short prayer, and then I'm going to do a song for you. So I'll begin with the prayer. Bojo Jimnado. Bojo misro miskizes, gibi wasayaje and nangam. Bojo no kamista bikizes, gibi wasayaje and nadabakak. Chimikwech kagamakwe, gimi jiang nesewin, gimi jiang bish, gimi jiang wesanyag, gimi jiang mashkikanin, gimi jiang mijim, gimi jiang bamadzuin. Sema de Bagdana o de Wabanang, Jawanang, Epen Gishmak, Minwagi Wednang, Nad Motion, Jimosh Kabuyan, Minwa Jazong de Aeon, Chimikwet Jimnado. So that prayer was about thanking Creator, thanking the grandfather sun for shining on us, grandmother moon for shining on us, giving thanks to Mother Earth for all that she provides, and offering Sima to the four directions to help us stand strong and with a good heart. And again, I thank the Creator for all of that. And the song that I want to sing for you is a song that was given to me back, I don't know how many years ago now. It's been quite a while. And I was at the First Nations University at their culture camp. And I met this elder that was there, and I can't remember his name for the life of me, but I remember the song, and I think that's what's important. And the words of the song are, come dance with me, grandfather Thunderbird. Come dance with me, grandmother Thunderbird. And then there's a chant. So I'm going to sing the song one time through, and then I'm going to invite people to sing with me the second line. And then at the end of the day, we'll finish it off. Okay. And I should let you know that I wasn't always a singer, and I didn't always have a voice, just like you see Roxanne's shirt over there with the two boy and girl on it. They're faceless, they're voiceless. And so that's what happened to a lot of us. And when I was about 11, I tried to join the choir, and they kicked me out. And so, but since then, I've learned that I have a voice. And the voice might not be the voice that you want it to be, but it is your voice. And so be proud of your voice and use that voice. And I think that's where we begin with this reconciliation, is that all of us who have not had a voice before, learn your voice and use it. So I'm going to sing this song now. So listen carefully to the first verse, because everybody's singing the second with me. That song is for all of the children, and that was why it was given to me, is for all of the children, past, present, and future, so that they can stand tall and strong. And so when I was given this song, he told me that I needed to teach this to people. And so I thought this was an excellent opportunity to teach that song. So think about that song all day long, and at the end of the day here, we're going to sing it 2 more verses to finish it off. So I hope everyone has a good day. Chimigwech.
Miigwech, Susan. So now I would also like to acknowledge Jason Nakaji, who is our firekeeper today. So if you have an opportunity to go and sit by the fire, I really encourage you to do so. So now I'd like to invite Roxanne Manitowabi to the podium, I guess, so to speak. Roxanne is a member of the Algonquins of Pikwakanagan. And she is retired from her role as the Executive Director of the Ontario Native Education Counselling Association. She served there for 22 years, so miigwech for that, Roxanne. Roxanne is also the recipient of the Laurentian University Native Education Person of Distinction Award. She received that award in 2015. Roxanne is passionate about education and believes that every student has the right to a good education, and that students should have access to all the supports they need to help them succeed. Let's welcome Roxanne.
Good morning. Ani, bonjour, wache, kwekwe. Like Mary said, my name is Roxanne Manitwabi. I'm from the Algonquins of Pikwakanagan, but I reside in the homelands of Atikameksheng and Anishinaabeg. I live in Penage. I'm the chair of LUNAC. On my way coming here this morning, I was thinking about our responsibility. And I live way back in the bush, so as I came over the hill, the sky was absolutely orange, and I've done that trip many times, and a lot of times it's kind of pinkish or purple, but this morning it was absolutely orange. And so I stopped and I took a picture, because it was like almost like a message that, I had a responsibility today, as do all of you. So today we're gathering here to remember and honor residential school survivors, their families, their communities, and those students who didn't come home from the residential school. It's a day to raise awareness of the horrific experiences many Indigenous people had in residential school, as well as the legacy of that system. Today, we recognize not only the historic harms, but also the intergenerational impacts and the ongoing violence in Indigenous communities that we continue to face. It's hard to even imagine or believe that there were 140 federally run residential schools here in Canada between 1867 and 1996. And that number 1996 really stood out to me because I have children that were born before 1996. And it made me think that, those could be my kids being taken away and just scooped up. And, it really is a sad, when I think about that, it makes me really sad that there were like more than 150,000 children that attended those schools, And as a parent and a soon-to-be grandparent, it's hard to even think about this. When I think about residential school, I think about language, and that was the first thing that residential school took away from Indigenous people. Children were beaten because they were speaking their language. I have a lot of friends who've gone through residential school, and the stories they told just for speaking their language, they're horrific. So I heard a young Anishinaabe man talking the other day, and he was asking the question about how different his life would be if his parents would not have gone to residential school. Would he be able to speak his language? And it was really sad because his question to us was, do we have enough time to regain and teach the next generation? Will there be enough speakers to teach and share their stories, their culture, their tradition, and their languages? And that time thing really stuck in my head. And I thought, okay, do we have enough time? And then I thought about the work that we're doing here at Laurentian, and it clicked, that, we are making that effort. This year, LUNAC decided to change our name from the Laurentian University Native Education Council to the Laurentian Natamagayagic Education Council, because it reflects who we are and who we service. Natamagayagic means the original people of this land. And this is an important step. To some you may think it's a small step, but to us it means a lot because, we're acknowledging who we are, where we come from, and who we support. The new name brings clarity to who we are as original people. Because for many, many years, there's been a lot of names imposed on us. Like we're natives one day, we're indigenous, we're aboriginal, we're status, we're non-status, we're half-breeds, you know? And we understand those words. Some of them are like very insulting. But to the average person, like I've had people say, well, what's the difference between native, indigenous? You know, and I can only imagine how hard it is for people doing research and doing work when you're lumping a whole group of First Nation, Métis, and Inuit people under the name Indigenous. Like, how do you do research? So that's what one of the things that LUNAC has done this year is, and that's such a positive step to move forward. As a committee, we've always been committed to reconciliation and doing this work. Language has always been a focal point. But, you know, if you had a chance to walk around the university, you know, even the space that we're in, you know, this is part of reconciliation because we never really had a space before. The paintings, you know, I think Laurentian, and we can be very proud of this, is we were one of the very first universities to have the language, our signage in the language. So that's some of the work that Laurentian's been doing, you know, but we have a long way to go, you know, and we each, I see reconciliation as kind of like a marriage. You know, it only works if everybody's working at it. So, you know, we as individuals, as communities, and an institution, we have that responsibility towards reconciliation. So I ask each of you to take a minute to think about how you can commit to reconciliation and what your institution, this institution, can do to commit to reconciliation. You know, like in the words of Marie Sinclair, education got us into this mess and education will get us out of this mess. So I've left a little pieces of paper because, you know, I'm all about the sticky notes. And, you know, if I don't write it down at my age, you know, you start to slip a little bit. So if you don't write it down, you won't remember it or you won't do it. So I've left some sticky notes over there. I want you to take, during the breaks, just take a sticky note and write down what you're going to commit to reconciliation. Miigwech.
Miigwech. Roxanne shared some hard truths about what residential schools were like, and I think you're going to hear some more hard truths throughout the presentation. So I'd like to introduce Nicole Wimagwans, who is here as a support person for the symposium today. So if you feel you need to chat, please reach out to Nicole. So next I'd like to introduce Natalie, who has worked diligently on the preparation of the Laurentian University Truth and Reconciliation Task Force report card. So we'll be looking at where we're at next. Miigwech, Natalie. Oh my gosh.
One moment.
So I have looked at my notes throughout this and felt very confident that I was doing okay. But I haven't looked at my agenda and followed my agenda at all. I've just thrown things in here and there willy-nilly. So I have been remiss and not invited the president up to say a few words before we move on to the Truth and Reconciliation report card.
Thank you, Mary. Good morning, everyone. I would be very happy to go after Natalie because she's got wonderful things to say. Good morning, bonjour, and minogajep. Thanks so much for being here. It's so great to see this room full to the top, and I understand there's even some overflow out into the atrium, which shows really the enthusiasm and the commitment that people at Laurentian University have to participate and to learn on the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. I want to thank everybody who organized today. I want to thank Dr. Murray for coming to join and to speak to you today, and for all the people who will share with you today their experiences. I just wanted to reflect a little bit. Susan mentioned that it's 10 years since the report from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was released. 10 years ago today, I was somewhere else that Susan mentioned, which is First Nations University of Canada. And that institution served as one of the sites for the hearings for the TRC for over a week. And I can tell you, I can still feel the emotion that was in that building with so many survivors sharing their stories. I was back there recently, and people asked me what it was like when the hearings were going on, and I said, I felt as if the walls were weeping. The whole building absorbed the emotion and just held it so that everybody could feel it. It was an amazing experience to be with these survivors and to hear their stories. It was heartrending, but that's the truth, right? It was the truth we all needed to hear. It was a difficult truth, and I felt very humbled to be in the presence of that truth. And then, of course, the report came out with calls to action. There were many of them, and so much to do, right? Almost an overwhelming number of things to do, so many things to do. But around that time, Dr. Murray Sinclair came to Regina, where I was, and I remember he stood in front of a huge crowd of people, and he said, it's easy. Just pick one. You don't have to do them all. Just pick one thing and do that. And if everybody picks one thing and does that, we'll make progress, right? And that really heartened me. And in the 10 years since then, I've been very fortunate to see progress on many fronts. To see Orange Shirt Day come into being. I got to meet Phyllis Webstad a few years ago, and she was just so inspirational. To see the success that Dr. Cindy Blackstock had in improving the situation for children in this country. Amazing, absolutely amazing. So many things that have happened. There's still so much to be done, but we can't be discouraged and we can't be overwhelmed by the fact that there's so much to be done. We just have to keep picking one thing and doing that one thing. So I love Roxanne's call. If everybody writes down one thing today, we'll have lots of things. There are lots of you here, and you can do a small thing or a big thing. It doesn't matter, as long as you're doing something to continue to learn, to be conscious of the history of this country, the true history of this country, and to work forward in a spirit of real reconciliation. So that's really all I wanted to say today, to just be grateful for having you all here together on this beautiful autumn day. I loved, Roxanne showed me her orange sunrise, and it was spectacular on her phone, so she'll show it to you if you ask her. She said, I take this as a sign. We're taking it as a sign that this is going to be a good day and we're all going to learn together. Thank you very much.
Miigwech, Dr. Wells, we really appreciate the words you shared with us today. And now, Natalie.
Just give me one moment. Just gonna put my water. So, wache, ani, bonjour, hello. My name is Natalie, and wache ani bojo nimki benishi and dao megaze dodem Natalie and Dejnakash meshkegawa dunjaba. I am Thunderbird. My given name is Natalie, and I come from the Eagle Clan, and I'm from Moose Factory, Ontario, so not my territory, but thank you for having me. For those of you who may not know me, I'm the manager of the Indigenous Strategic Community Engagement Office and within the Office of Academic and Indigenous Programs. I am relatively new to this role and was created as a part of the university's commitment to advancing the calls to action and the truth and reconciliation. Before stepping into this position, I did previously work here for 5 years as a recruitment coordinator. I am very proud to once again work here at Laurentian University in this new capacity. It is truly an honor to continue supporting the voices, relationships, and initiatives here at the university. Although I am disseminating the information on the Truth and Reconciliation report card, I am new to the position, as I said, so I just want to honor all of the people that worked on this beforehand. So the people that work within the Office of the Academic and Indigenous Programs and all the people within the Indigenous Sharing and Learning Center. I just want to give them a round of applause right now just for all their hard work. And I was going to try to memorize this whole speech, however, it is 17 pages long, and it's very important work, so I wanted to ensure that I didn't forget anything on it, so there we go. In 2018, Laurentian established the Truth and Reconciliation Task Force responses to the calls to action. This work was guided by broad community consultation and included the Laurentian University's Nitagamayagic it's a new word for me, Education Council, and over 60 institutional leads. In 2021, the Truth and Reconciliation Task Force Implementation Committee was formed to oversee these recommendations. That same year, the first National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, more than 40 members of the Laurentian community came together to create the first institutional report card. The creation of the Truth and Reconciliation Task Force in 2018 was our way of responding to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's 94 calls to action. From that came 10 recommendations, and this became a roadmap of how Laurentian can embody the reconciliation, not just as a one-time gesture, but as an ongoing responsibility. Today, I want to walk you through those recommendations, not just as a report card of progress, but as a story of our journey. Some areas shine brightly and showing what is possible when we come together. Others remind us of the gaps and challenges that remain, but all of them push us forward at the same time towards truth. Reconciliation is not an endpoint, it is a process, and it is a relationship and a daily practice. So let us begin. Recommendation 1. Let's begin with something familiar, the land acknowledgement. One of the most important commitments Laurentian University has made for advancing truth and reconciliation is ensuring that our leadership to the land is visible, meaningful, and lived every day. Land acknowledgements are not just words. They are reminders of our responsibility to Atikamekw and Anishinaabeg First Nation and Wanapitei First Nation, and those traditional lands we are privileged to live and work upon and learn. Over the past few years, we have made significant progress in embedding these acknowledgements throughout our campus. In our arts building, commonly known as the bowling alley, a space with high student traffic, there is a prominent installation of a land acknowledgement, encouraging daily reflection and dialogue. Within the university atrium, a central gathering place for campus, an accessible land acknowledgement has been placed, ensuring reconciliation is at the heart of our community life. And for those of you who are visiting, if you go out into the atrium, it's right beside the subway, so if you want to go take a look over there. At the Fraser Auditorium, which hosts major ceremonies and public events, land acknowledgement is built directly into our protocol. And without the MacEwan School of Architecture, the land acknowledgement is placed both on the outdoor and indoor signage, ensuring that Indigenous presence is symbolized in the very structure and values of the school. We have also expanded beyond signage. Land acknowledgement is now included in all official presentations within our university website and was also printed within our view book this year, our pathway books, and our graduate guides. The installation of the Every Child Matters crosswalk, which can be seen just outside the Parker Building and between the Student Center and the Parker Building, serve as a daily reminder of our commitment to honoring children, families, and the communities affected by residential schools. At our main entrance, the welcome sign on Ramsey Lake now proudly reads Bindigan, an inclusive way of saying, come on in. and it's a teaching that greets all of us who enter with respect and openness. This progress builds upon earlier efforts where preliminary signage and verbal protocols were first put in place. But reconciliation, as I said, is ongoing work. We are now exploring ways to expand land acknowledgements into spaces across campus, into digital platforms, into our classroom syllabi, and throughout our university communications. We are also working beyond words and signage. Efforts are underway to create interactive educational materials such as QR code links to our land acknowledgement signs. This will allow students, staffs, and our visitors to know deeply about our history, culture, and the rights of the Indigenous people, and to understand why these acknowledgements matter. In this way, land acknowledgements become not just statements, but doorways into education, reflection, and accountability. They are meant to remind us that reconciliation is not just an event, but a journey, a responsibility that we carry in every day and as a part of our communities, or part of our university community. Okay, the next recommendation is language initiatives. Respectful inclusion of Anishinaabe is central to Laurentian University's reconciliation journey. It is directly tied to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action 13, 14, and 15, which speak to the preservation, revitalization, and strengthening of Indigenous languages. At Laurentian, important steps have been taken to elevate Anishinaabe as a living and vibrant language across campus. Work is underway to implement a trilingual language policy that gives Anishinaabe visibility and values in all areas of the university life. Through the Faculty of Education and Faculty of Health, seminars have been delivered on Anishinaabe linguistics frameworks, highlighting our traditions, storytelling, and experiential and land-based learning, and the teachings of our elders and knowledge carriers. These approaches not only honor Indigenous pedagogy, but also the meaningful connections between language, culture, and community. Community learning opportunities are being expanded through weekly Anishinaabe lessons offered at the Indigenous Sharing and Learning Center, so please come on down. These sessions are open to students, staff, and faculty, and serve as an accessible way to build knowledge, relationships, and respect for the language. Anishinaabe has always been an integral part of the university's newsletters, giving language visibility in our day-to-day communications. In addition, in the 2026 Viewbook, it now incorporates Anishinaabe as a learning tool, helping prospective students experience Laurentian's unique tricultural identity while promoting language achievements. This builds on earlier efforts from 2022, when the university began to offer Anishinaabe courses and engaging foundational policy discussions. Looking ahead, we recognize the need for dedicated spaces on campus for teaching, preservation, and promotion of Anishinaabe a space where we could serve as a language center and institute. This would provide a hub for mentorship programs, language nests, and immersion opportunities for students, staff, faculty, and ensuring that language is carried forward with strength and generations to come. Our recommendation number 3 is our land-based learning. One of the most powerful ways we can advance reconciliation is by expanding land-based learning opportunities for students, faculty, and researchers. Land-based learning grounds education in place, culture, and community, while honoring Indigenous knowledge systems. Laurentian has taken meaningful steps in this area. In partnership with the Tikishing Anishinaabe First Nation, we now offer a series of Anishinaabe land-based immersion courses, bringing learners directly onto the land where language and culture can be experienced in an authentic way. This approach moves beyond the classroom and into the living spaces. Building on this, Indy 4595, and the program is called At the Center Journée, will offer the first time in 2025, further expanding the immersive language and land-based learning experience. At the Center Journée is the final course that students are required to take for a certificate in Anishinaabe land-based immersion. At the same time, we are developing additional partnerships to create more land-based learning sites within Indigenous communities, ensuring that these experiences are available across multiple disciplines. Our commitment is also strengthened through formalization of partnerships with Indigenous institutions. New and ongoing memorandums of understanding are being developed are being developed with partnerships such as Kenja Wintag and Wengish Film Institute, ensuring collaborative and sustainable pathways for education is rooted in land, culture, and in story. This represents significant progress compared to 2022, when land-based opportunities were limited to isolated areas and pilot initiatives. Now they are becoming a core part of Laurentian's academic landscape. Looking forward, one of the next steps is to create a centralized calendar for land-based learning events. This will allow students, faculty across all faculties to easily access opportunities, making land-based learning more visible, celebrated, and an integral part of the university life. Recommendation number 4 is Mamosang Indigenous Research Institute. The creation of a dedicated space for Mamosang Indigenous Research Institute marks one of the most exciting and transformative steps in Laurentian's Truth and Reconciliation journey, and I hope that all of you can join us later in the afternoon for the opening. Mamosang means people collaborating together, and this name reflects the very heart of the Institute, centering Indigenous worldviews, amplifying Indigenous voices, and advancing research grounded in decolonial critique and community priorities. Phase 1 of this project has been completed, and later this afternoon will mark the opening of the Mamosang Indigenous Research Institute space located in P226 in the Parker Building. This will be the first time the Institute has a designated home on campus. After years of operating without a physical space, the new office will serve as a welcoming hub for Indigenous-led, community-driven research, a place where students, faculty, and Indigenous partners can gather, collaborate, and share their knowledge. This new visibility will also reflect across the campus through signage, pop-up banners, and digital screens, ensuring that the Mamosang Indigenous Research Institute is recognized as a central part of Laurentian's academic and cultural landscape. Graduate student presentations will further showcase the indigeneity-focused research, bringing attention to the strength and innovation of Indigenous scholarship. Looking forward to phase 2, this project will focus on designing the interior space to ensure it fosters both a learning and research environment that is positive, inclusive, and reflective of Indigenous values. A long-term sustainability and growth plan is in our future developments, in collaboration with university leadership, grant agencies, government, and the Indigenous organizations. This plan will ensure that the Mamosang Indigenous Research Institute has funding, staffing, and resources to continue building momentum for years to come. With this progress, the Mamosang Indigenous Research Institute is no longer just a vision. It becomes a lived reality that will strengthen relationships, advance reconciliation, and ensure that Indigenous research is given the recognition and support that it deserves. Recommendation number 5 is the Indigenous Verification Policy. And this is a very sensitive but critical area, ensuring that those who teach Indigenous content have the necessary qualifications, cultural knowledge, and authentic community connection, and is essentially responsible for this university. This work is being advanced through the development of a policy led by the Office of the Academic and Indigenous Programs. This policy is designed to ensure that applicants for Indigenous-specific roles and programs demonstrate genuine community connections and lived experience. For faculty, it means that it is ensuring that those entrusted to teach Indigenous content are not only academically prepared, but are also culturally grounded to Indigenous communities. In this way, the policy safeguards Indigenous knowledge and ensures that it is carried forward in an intricate and respectful way. This is about truth, about transparency, and about accountability. It recognizes the importance of protecting Indigenous voices and preventing the misuse and misrepresentation of Indigenous identities and knowledge within academic spaces. It also aligns with the broader post-secondary accountability efforts that are going across Canada, where institutions are called to ensure authenticity and responsibility in who they hire and who they support. As this work moves forward, Laurentian is considering the creation of a review committee made up of Indigenous faculty, elders, and community members. Such a committee could guide and elevate course material, ensuring that Indigenous knowledge is taught with accuracy, respect, and alignment with the Indigenous values, especially the Indigenous values from this area. At the same time, Laurentian is working to maintain a list of qualified Indigenous educators and knowledge carriers who can be engaged in guest lectures, co-facilitation, and curriculum development. This will strengthen teaching across the faculties while also supporting the involvement of local communities in shaping and how Indigenous content is shared. Compared to 2022, when discussions about vetting instructors were only just beginning, the development of this policy represents a significant step towards protecting Indigenous knowledge, uplifting Indigenous educators, and ensuring that the reconciliation in the classroom is done with care, integrity, and accountability. Just a moment, I just need to take a drink here. Recommendation number 6 is local Anishinaabe knowledge. Ensuring that Indigenous teachings and knowledge shared at Laurentian come directly from the local Anishinaabe people is fundamental to building trust to advancing reconciliation in a meaningful way. This principle guides our work with the Atikamekw Anishinaabe First Nation, Wanapitei First Nation, and the surrounding First Nations from this area. Collaborating with these nations is not symbolic, it is an active and ongoing. First Nations, Inuit, and Métis members provide input to ensure the content taught at Laurentian is rooted in Anishinaabe knowledge, perspectives, and values. This ensures that the Indigenous content is not only authentic, but also shared in the way that honors the people from whom this knowledge comes. We have also embedded these commitments into ceremonial moments defined in our institution. At the presidential installation ceremony, a First Nations medallion designed by one of our local artists was gifted as a part of the tradition. This act symbolizes respect, authenticity, and the importance of grounding our practices and the teachings in the land and the people around it. Looking ahead, Laurentian is exploring the creation of a formal advisory group made up of local elders, knowledge carriers, and community members from Atikamekw Anishinaabe First Nation and Wanapitei First Nation. Such a group would play an essential role in reviewing the co-development content involving Anishinaabe teachings, ensuring cultural protocol and community voices guide the process from start to finish. Finally, the Office of Academic and Indigenous Programs and the Indigenous Sharing and Learning Center are working closely with surrounding First Nations to develop a cultural humility and anti-racism training modules. They serve as an important tool for faculty, staff, and students, helping to ensure that learning at Laurentian happens in the spirit of respect, understanding, and collaboration. Our recommendation number 7 was cultural competency training. Another important step towards reconciliation at Laurentian is ensuring that all members of our university community engage in a meaningful cultural competency training, guided directly by the Indigenous voices. The revised cultural competency training module is rooted in First Nations, Inuit, and Métis knowledge, with a strong emphasis on community-based teachings. This training is not just a checkbox exercise. It is an experience designed to transform the understanding and relationships. It includes storytelling, ceremony, land-based education, and the sharing of protocols, ensuring that participants gain knowledge in a way that reflects Indigenous teachings and learning. A key feature of this training is that a certificate of completion are endorsed by First Nations. This endorsement signals accountability, but also recognition that the training reflects the guidance and approval of Indigenous partners. And I'd also like to thank Nadia for coming in today, specifically because we are going to be moving forward with this pilot project with her. So thank you for that. Thank you for supporting us. This is not just a static program. Modules are continuously reviewed and updated in collaboration with local First Nations and remain accurate, respectful, and relevant to the communities whose teachings are being shared. In 2022, the cultural humility training was available only through D2L. And D2L is the platform that we use for those of you who don't are not working at Laurentian or a student. Since then, we have taken a significant step forward by working directly with Indigenous communities to co-create and expand these learning opportunities. Looking ahead, we are considering a policy that would require all staff and faculty members to complete this training. Such a policy would ensure that all members of this institution, regardless of their roles, engage in this important learning. Alongside engagement, we are also, we are exploring the development of a system to track the attendance, engagement, and evaluate learning from the training modules, ensuring accountability and continuous improvements. By centering community-led training initiatives, Laurentian is not only building cultural awareness, but also demonstrating respect for Anishinaabe teachings and fostering a campus that is more inclusive, knowledgeable, and accountable of its people and the land. We're almost there, guys. Number 8. Funding reconciliation. This is an area where we need a little bit more work. A critical measure of reconciliation is where and how institutions choose to invest their resources. At Laurentian, we are making progress in ensuring that reconciliation is dependent not solely on Indigenous-led or externally funded initiatives, but is supported directly through the university's core budget. Over the past year, we have seen new efforts to advance this commitment. The Office of Advancement has developed pitch decks to secure external granting for key Indigenous initiatives. These include the ISLC Arbor, the implementation and expansion of Mamazing Indigenous Research Institute, the development of multiple annual symposiums, the RHT Digital Repository, and collaborative events with our community partners. These initiatives create meaningful spaces for Indigenous knowledge, research, and dialogue to flourish. At the same time, the marketing department has committed institutional resources by allocating their budget for the creation of installation and permanent land acknowledgement signage across the campus. This is a visible and lasting expression of respect and recognition for the Indigenous peoples and their territories. We are also advocating for Laurentian to publish an annual financial report specifically on reconciliation-related spending. This would provide transparency and accountability, ensuring that Indigenous initiatives remain visible and sustained priority. Another important step is dedicating budget resources for honorariums, ensuring that knowledge carriers and elders are respectfully gifted their time, teachings, and their guidance. This is a matter of dignity, respect, and reciprocity. We continue to have conversations regarding open parking for Indigenous-led events, allowing for full access for elders and community members and its guests. So we'd like to also thank for the free parking that we got today. Compared to 2022, when reconciliation work relied entirely on Indigenous-specific funds or external funds. These steps reflect an important shift. Laurentian is working towards dedicating institutional resources to reconciliation and ensuring that this work is recognized, valued, and sustainably supported. Recommendation number 9, community engagement. Reconciliation is about relationships. Increasing meaningful engagement and involvement with Indigenous communities is the cornerstone of Laurentian University's reconciliation work. Reconciliation, recognizing this, the university created a new position, the Manager of Indigenous Strategic Community Engagement, tasked with leading the coordination of these efforts across campus and the surrounding communities. This work has already resulted in significant initiatives, for example, the collaboration with the First Nations, contribution and creation of the Laurentians Eagle Staff, a symbol of respect, culture, and community connection. LUNEC, as a governing body, continues to recruit new community representatives, ensuring that Indigenous perspectives help shape governance and decision-making. Art and storytelling continue to play an important role within community engagement. Around the Indigenous Sharing and Learning Center, the reproduction of the Leland Bell's artwork named Survival, reflects the resilience and creativity of Indigenous communities. Laurentian also actively highlights positive narratives of Indigenous community members, leaders, including Ted Nolan, Tanya Talaga, and Wabagisha Grace, bringing recognition to their contributions both all locally, nationally, and internationally. Looking forward, the recommendation is to create a quarterly roundtable to bring together local Indigenous service organizations. This provides a forum to share updates, explore partnerships, and identify shared priorities, strengthening collaboration between Laurentian University and Indigenous-led initiatives. Another key priority is establishing pathways for Indigenous students to complete placements in co-ops or community serve learning with Indigenous-led organizations in Sudbury. These opportunities not only provide valuable practical experience for students, but also build stronger relationships and mutual learning between the university and local Indigenous communities. Compared to 2022, when relationships were growing but lacked formal coordination, these steps demonstrate that Laurentian University's commitment to moving from good intentions to structured, accountable, and mutually beneficial partnerships with Indigenous communities. The goal is pretty simple: for Laurentian to engage in meaningful partnerships with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities. Recommendation number 10 is hiring and onboarding. Ensuring that Laurentian University's Truth and Reconciliation goals are embedded in hiring and onboarding processes is an essential step for creating inclusive and accountable campus. The Office of the Human Resources has begun posting positions on Indigenous-specific job sites, helping to provide equitable employment opportunities for First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. This represents significant progress compared to 2022, when there was no formal alignment of an HR process with the university's Truth and Reconciliation objectives. Going forward, positions will include statements highlighting Laurentian's commitment to the Truth and Reconciliation and the importance of cultural competency when working with Indigenous peoples. It is our aim to ensure that the onboarding will also reflect these commitments. New staff and faculty will complete modules that provide the overview of the Truth and Reconciliation Task Force and its goals, including key concepts such as territorial acknowledgements, cultural safety, and Indigenous governance structures. The modules will also introduce employees to Laurentian's Indigenous programs, our spaces, like the Indigenous Sharing and Learning Center, and our ongoing community partnerships. By integrating reconciliation principles into hiring and onboarding, Laurentian ensures that every new member of Laurentian University's community understands the responsibility, the values, and the commitments that are central to working respectfully with Indigenous peoples. This strengthens the university's culture and ensures that reconciliation is more than a policy. It is a part of how we build and sustain our community. In closing, we review these 10 recommendations. Each recommendation tells a story that has been done, a partnership that has been built, and a knowledge shared, and of the steps that still need to be taken. Some areas, like our visible and meaningful land acknowledgements and the creation of the Mamosang Indigenous Research Institute, shine as an example of what can be achieved when vision meets commitment. They remind us of the power of collaboration, of listening and honoring Indigenous voices at the center of our work. These initiatives show that when we act with intention, created spaces are inclusive, educational, and can be transformative. Other areas, like securing sustainable funding for Indigenous initiatives, embedded reconciliation into hiring and onboarding processes, and ensuring authentic community engagement, remind us that the journey is still ongoing. These challenges are not setbacks, they are opportunities. They ask us how to think critically, plan carefully, and how to act boldly. They remind us that reconciliation is not a project with a fixed endpoint, but a living and evolving responsibility. On this day of National Truth and Reconciliation, I invite each of us to reflect deeply. What role do I play in this work? How do I contribute? Not just today, but in every interaction, in every decision, in every class, in every meeting. How do I ensure that the commitments of our university are reflected in my own actions? Reconciliation is not just an Indigenous task alone. It is a Canadian task, an educational task, and ultimately a human task. It asks us all, it asks all of us a willingness to listen, learn, and to act with humility. It asks us to recognize the path forward may not be linear, but a commitment, reflection, and a collaboration that guides us. At Laurentian University, we are committed to walking this road together with our students, our faculty, our staff, elders, knowledge carriers, and community partners. We can transform our words into actions, policies into practice, and intentions into meaningful impact. We can create a university where Indigenous knowledge, languages, and culture are not only respected, but are celebrated, where Indigenous students, faculty, and community members feel seen, supported, and empowered. and where all members of our community understand that truth and reconciliation are a shared responsibility. So today, let us reflect not only on the knowledge that has been accomplished, but with resolve on what can be done. Let us consider now how each of us in our own ways can contribute to the ongoing work of reconciliation, every day in small and large ways, in our classrooms, offices, and within every interaction. Miigwech. Merci. Thank you. Oh, yes. The buzzer? Oh, yes. Sorry, does anybody have any questions? Like I said, I am fairly new, so don't come at me too hot. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Oh, okay. Well, I'm going to be here all day. Okay.
Hi.
Yep.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Mic is on.
So I'm actually from out of town. I'm a Master of Law student right now, and I actually have done research, my research paper on combating Indigenous health discrimination by strengthening healthcare provider regulation. I've presented my research at 2 conferences, and I just wanted to ask about specifically the Indigenous verification policy, because I feel like when I've presented, I've wanted to include mandatory training for regulated healthcare professionals, and a lot of people have told me, well, that's just too far out of reach. Like, how are you going to get everybody to do the training? So I just wanted to know if you've experienced any pushback from that, and how you've gone forward or with your suggestions.
We are currently in the process of developing the verification policy. However, it's a long process, especially because of how everything that has happened within Canada based on that. However, we went through the process of going through with different departments and having sharing circles to see what they would like. Our next step is going to be with faculty, and then after that we are doing community-led consultation with that. We've also done a lot of research on what other communities or other educational institutions have put forward for their policy. However, we haven't gotten to that next step yet, so I don't have anything for you. I don't know if Mary, if you, because we haven't done that part yet.
So the conversations about mandatory training are ongoing and open. And the question about how can all that happen, it happens one department at a time. It happens one person at a time. Just as everybody has said here, one person at a time making a difference,
An ongoing process.
And then all of a sudden you have capacity, right? And so that's what we work toward. Just those who are willing, and then using or hoping that those continue to share that kind of information, that this is important information. So I think it's always just about one step at a time.
Thank you.
And as kind of Mary, I just want to reiterate that I feel like once one policy goes through, or once one institution takes it, one department, then it'll be a trickle effect, right? Then people will see all the good work that comes from it, and it'll be continuous throughout different institutions. And so thank you for your question. Like I said, we'll be here all day, so if you do have any questions or you're just shy, feel free to come up and talk to us. You can also come to our departments at any time throughout the year as well. We are more than happy to answer any questions for you. We do have some gifts for our speakers, so if Haley would like to come up and offer some of those. Also, we have copies of the report card. If anybody would like to take one home with them, you can peruse them, and if you have other questions later on, you can also come and ask. Okay. I would like to ask Roxanne Manitowoc to come up and accept this gift of our appreciation. Yay, Roxanne! Thank you. Susan Manitowoc. Sorry, Dr. Susan. Thank you. Dr. Lynn Wells. So we're just going to have a short break. There's coffee and refreshments outside, and then we are going to have Kimberly Murray come up. Thank you.
Just a reminder to be back at 10:30. Well, we're trying. Our leadership, we don't have, so we're doing very well. No, I think we're doing fantastic. Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate it. It is so exciting. I was like, where did someone go? Was it in Ottawa?
No, it was this weekend in the market. The market like in downtown, like down the street.
Right. Oh, those are beautiful. Yes.
So they're gonna have my it's
Yep.
already up.
Look at that, eh?
Is it off?
I just want to test it.
Oh, can you test the video?
No, I did that. It works great. I just want to make sure. Oh yeah, your
So
clicker's
just
working.
usually the volume is like sometimes in the video it's
I
not
have.
loud enough.
I took the volume and I put it into a mixer, so I can crank the
Okay.
living heck out of it. My name's
Yeah.
Bill.
Nice to meet you, Bill.
Good to meet you.
Thanks for being able to, because I think they had some trouble getting it off the Dropbox.
Yeah.
Because it's
when
too big, I
when
guess.
I took it from my office computer, everything downloaded it, and then all the fonts were messed up and blah blah blah. So I went, I'm gonna try it on my laptop. I downloaded it on my laptop, and everything was fine except for one photo where the font is small and it's black. So I just moved that font box to the top of the slide, so you can. I think it's a picture of the planes or something, but you can read it really well now.
Okay.
That's all I did.
Yeah, there's a lot of like things like this. Even this front slide, I see it's not twinkling. So there's a lot of animation in
Yeah,
some of the
that's
slides,
okay.
but anyway, it's like a mishmash of
It's all
different.
gonna be good.
Nice to meet you. I was the founding director of the school. Way back when we were university stuff way back when I started here. And we were a program under the School of Social Work. So the School of Social Work had 3 streams, English, French, and native streams. And then they decided that they weren't paying enough attention to us or giving us credit for what we knew. So we decided that we were going to go on our own and quickly and they have international councils. They're saying that prevention is really important. So because I was the chair at the time, I ended up doing all that work. So we got to do that for one program and I got an accreditation. I became skilled in services. Then we came the students, well, we added a program on master religious relations. We had to change the name so we could put that program under our schools. We became a school of religious relations. So there's a lot of stuff. Lots of memory, but you know, I think that what I like to talk about is religion and indigenous relations.
Oh yeah,
there is one there. Hey.
Let's see if there's anything in it though. Looks like a used Kleenex.
Oh, gross. Okay, let's.
No,
we
it's
need
just.
Yeah,
It's just squished. It's just squished.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Were people able to pick up a copy of the report card, those that wanted one? If you were unable to and do want one, please let Carol know from our office, and she'll be able to have one sent to you. I also want to acknowledge Allison, who has worked with her students to create those beautiful butterflies that you saw on the table out there, to help highlight and help students understand the importance of reconciliation work. So thank you, miigwech, Allison. So I'd like to now introduce you to Kimberly Murray. Kimberly Murray commenced her new role as Queen's National Scholar, Indigenous Legal Studies on January 1st, 2025, after completing a federal appointment as the independent special interlocutor for missing children and unmarked graves and burial sites associated with Indian residential schools. Murray has dedicated much of her legal career to promoting reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people and advocating for Indigenous communities. She was the Province of Ontario's first ever Assistant Deputy Attorney General for Indigenous Justice from 2015 to 2022, where she worked to support communities, revitalize their Indigenous laws, and expanded legal services and programs for Indigenous people. Please join me in a warm welcome.
Sego se guego, Kimberly Murray Yungyats, Ganye Gahaga Ni Negana Satage, Wakwaho. Good morning still, right? I apologize for my messy hair. I went outside by the sacred fire and it's really windy out there. I had to cool down because I'm still wearing my pants from my drive in under my skirt. So I want to, I introduced myself in Mohawk. I am Mohawk of Ganasatake, which is a community outside Montreal. I told you that I'm Wolf Clan. I'm really honored to be here today. I was driving up here. I live in Toronto. I got up at 3. Yeah, yesterday I was up at 4. But I got up at 3 and I drove up here and I got to see that beautiful sunrise as well. And it was so wonderful. And my colleague, Laver Simard, who lives in Winnipeg, he's a really early riser. He worked with me at both the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and when I was the special interlocutor. He traveled with me across the country and made sure I didn't get in trouble around protocols. He was really great with protocols. He sent me a text message this morning wishing me well and a happy National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. And he was on his way to a sunrise ceremony at the Winnipeg Police. And so, you know, I wished him well. I wasn't texting, I was talking to Siri. She was sending my text for me. And then an hour later, you know, it's a long drive from Toronto, he wrote me back and he said that he was on his way, and I'm gonna get emotional, thank you for the Kleenex. He was on his way to go visit Murray Sinclair and Catherine, his wife, at their burial site. And he said that he had some bannock, Murray loved his bannock, that the police gave him to bring to Murray and Catherine at their burial site. And so that really warmed my heart. And of course, he made a little joke about how Murray Sinclair always used to talk about his relationship with the Winnipeg police over the years. So I'm sure he would really appreciate that visit from Laver and that bannock that he received from the police. So I want to first say thank you to Laurentian for inviting me today to share some words on this National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. I want to recognize the university leadership, the provost and the president who stepped out, I think, for being here, and also recognize the Indigenous leadership in the room, and thank you for joining. I want to say now I miigwech to for the songs and the prayers and the opening words. And I'm trying to remember the song for later. My people, we, when we start the day, we always start and give thanks to all of creation, and including the sun. It's so important that we have our songs and our drums and our opening words to bring our minds together as one. And I think that you did that this morning, and so I say miigwech to both of you for the openings. I also want to acknowledge any survivors that are in the room and intergenerational survivors. I know this day is not an easy day. It's never an easy day. And I want to acknowledge you and also say thank you, Nawagoa, big thank you to you and your family and your communities for everything that you have done to continue to speak the truth, to continue to try and make change in Canada so that we have a better society, to continue to lead the work of reconciliation, even though it shouldn't be you. It shouldn't be Indigenous people that have to lead that work. But they are the ones doing that work. So I want to acknowledge survivors and intergenerational survivors. Congratulations to Laurentian for the great work you're doing on your reconciliation plan. I kind of felt like maybe we should have reversed the order of our presentation. Because I had such hope and happiness to see the work that you're doing, and to think that none of this work would have been done 10 years ago. And so I'm going to take us back a little bit about why we're here today. And so some of you might not be familiar with my previous position. I was the independent special interlocutor for missing children and unmarked graves and burial sites associated with Indian residential schools. When the Minister of Justice, David Lametti, asked me to take the position, I said, what the heck is an interlocutor? Many people don't know how to pronounce it. I didn't know what it meant. I had to Google it when I was asked to take the position. And elders and survivors always used to joke with me when I traveled the country, calling me all kinds of different things, not an interlocutor, an intervener, an interloper, an interferer, which I enjoyed all those titles that they gave me. But essentially an interlocutor, and my job was to meet with communities and survivors and the teams that are searching for the missing and disappeared children. And you're probably noticing that I used the term disappeared, and I'm going to talk about that in my presentation. And so I was tasked to go coast to coast to coast to hear from communities about the barriers that they're facing as they're searching for the unmarked burials. And the government asked me to make recommendations for a new legal framework moving forward to protect the burials of the children. And anyone that knows me, I did what I was told, but I kind of changed what I was told to do and did a little bit more than what they expected. I think the government was quite surprised with what they received from me. I had a 2-year mandate, and like every commission of any kind of inquiry, I needed an extension. I was really upset that I had to ask for that extension because I really wanted to get the work done for the survivors and for the communities, because we know that we're losing them every day. And so I'm going to share with you something that I released on time that was meant to be part of my full final report, but I wanted to make sure I released something at the time of the June 2024 deadline. So I was appointed in June 2022 for 2 years. I was extended for an extra 6 months I released my final report in October of 2024. I had a number of meetings with leadership and the government and international community on my findings. And then I went to Queen's to teach at Queen's. It's a very different pace. But I'm very much enjoying being with the students and doing that work. As always, I just want to let people know that my presentation can be quite upsetting. I'm going to be showing a video, and I have a number of photos that are of missing and disappeared children in cemeteries. And so I like to make sure that I put the support line if you need any assistance. And also we have Nicole in the room, at the back of the room, Nicole Wimagwans. So thank you for being here. And I'll just give a moment if folks want to write that down, the number down. So before I show the video, I just want to go back to the calls to action. And you heard there were 94 calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And call to action 80 up here on the screen was about creating a National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. And the purpose of the day is to honor survivors, their families, and communities to ensure that public commemoration of the history and legacy of Indian residential schools remains a vital component of the reconciliation process. I like to remind people it's meant to be a somber day, right? It's a day to reflect, it's a day for us to mourn, and it's a day for us to consider how, as a country, we can do better. And, you know, June 21st is the day we celebrate. And it's important that we don't mix those up, National Day for Truth and Reconciliation and June 21st. I'm really honored that everyone came here to share in this reflection today that we're going to be doing. In its final report, the commissioners wrote that survivors want Canadians to know, to remember, to care, and to change. The whole point of the TRC process was to ensure that Canadians learn the truths and history about Indian residential schools and the harms that were perpetrated against Indigenous people and communities by the government and the churches that ran them. The commissioners wrote that Canada's national history must reflect its complex truth so that our children's children and their children will know what happened, as they are the ones that will inherit the responsibility to ensure that it never happens again. When I was driving up or driving into the university, I haven't been here for a while. The last time I was here, I was driving my daughter, who's a Corbier, not from the island, Corbier from Batchewana, and she was coming here for her first Anishinaabe land camp, on the land camp, language camp. She was so nervous because she was like the youngest person in the camp. And she stayed in the residences over here, and they had the camp for the whole week. She's now a teacher and teaches Anishinaabe, and that's in like 4 years. So that gives me hope about the future for our children. But today what I want to do is share some truths with you. Some truths that the TRC spoke about in volume 4 of its final report on missing children, but I'm going to share a little bit more of the truth from the work that I did in the 2.5 years as the special interlocutor. So I'm going to show you, don't play it yet, where's the guy with the, I'm going to show you this video. It's 11 minutes, and it shows the journey I was on as the special interlocutor. In addition to traveling to communities, walking the burial grounds with families, and meeting the teams that are doing the searches, I held 7 national gatherings across the country. This video has clips from 6 of the 7. The 7th was the last one I held, so it didn't make it into the video. I showed this video at our last national gathering when I released the final report. We're gonna play the video. Miigwech.
Being in the residential school wasn't pretty.
My husband was 11 years in residential school. He never held my girls because he was too scared to break them. That's residential school. That is the impacts of it.
They tried to take our spirits away. They tried to take the Indian out of us.
I was kidnapped in broad daylight, right in front of my parents, when I was being taken away from our outpost camp to go to a residential school.
The children have been taken from us, and we want them back to make the world safe for the children we now have and the ones that are coming.
Le système, il est brisé, il est malhonnête, il n'est pas égal pour tout le monde. Qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire quand ça arrive des choses-là? Qu'est-ce qu'on peut suggérer au gouvernement de faire, de se corriger de son comportement?
It is so impactful and hurtful to think of children who would be given such disrespect in life and in death.
When you die, you should be buried. You should have a proper burial.
We had a distinct way to honor the people who left us. There were ceremonies, there were songs, and for the children at our schools that are in unmarked burials, they have yet to receive this.
You don't get to the point of religious equality, racial equality, unless you understand foundational inequality in Canada that is steeped in centuries of colonialism and racism by European settlers who imposed their will in a colonial and racist manner.
I'm in a room right now full of survivors who have been through unimaginable abuse and torment only because they were simply born Indigenous.
Like we were not human. The number one law is not to harm a child. And that's exactly what the government did.
Children disappeared at residential schools and other institutions, buried in unmarked graves, forgotten, erased. But they were not forgotten by their families, by their communities, by their people. We can't bring these children back, but we can empower ourselves to ensure that our traditions and communities don't just survive, but thrive.
We couldn't speak our language. We couldn't even use our name. I was given a number. I still remember my number, and that's how they called you. A number.
I was broken spirit since then. I didn't know who I was. I lost my culture, my spirituality, my beliefs, my value.
Some of the young girls, they would go missing for months on end. The priests and the nuns would hide those girls when they got pregnant, and they wouldn't see them for 9 months while they were carrying their babies. And then after that, my mom and 2 of her cousins were responsible for wrapping those babies and burning them.
As a boy in that residential school, mission school, the burning of little babies being thrown in the furnace by 2 nuns, and the screaming.
A young woman was disciplined by the nuns and the children, and the man whipped her until she died.
The building was run by the heat from the big stove only in the furnace. There was a lot of babies that was burnt in there.
Some of us didn't know how to deal with our feelings. We didn't know where to go, what to do.
We have boys missing for 50 years now. They were killed. Their lives were taken. They were murdered.
We don't know how many survivors are left. Many of them don't even want to come forward. They chose to forget what has happened to them and not be a part of this. They don't want anything to do with it.
My mom attended residential school in Beauval Mission, La Planche. I'm the youngest of 11 children. The two oldest babies passed away. In her dying bed, my mother said, "Please look for him."
Right now in Italy, we don't have the best cemetery. They didn't listen to our knowledge, and they put the cemetery in a bog. So all of our people right now are being buried in muck and swampy areas. So we're hoping that we can open up a traditional cemetery in Iqaluit so that our people aren't being buried in muck and swamps, and that we can be buried traditionally and with our personal effects.
It's time for Canada as a whole to see this uncomfortable truth for what it is. It's time for them to feel it, see it, sit with those unsettling feelings, and learn from it so it does not happen again. No more denying what our survivors have been saying for years. No more belittling what it was, because it was genocide.
We need to uphold justice for the Indian residential school children who were murdered in these institutions and have those individuals held accountable. These individuals are still alive, and the laws and the policies created by the Canadian government hide their crimes. And in order for us to have justice, these people need to face justice with Canadian laws.
Orange Shirt Day and Every Child Matters was created to honor survivors and their families and to remember those that never made it home.
There's very few people that have that gift and that strength to stand up and speak on behalf of people. And when you have that passion in your heart, that's what drives you to do the good things for your people who need a voice.
It's an honor and a privilege to announce the appointment of Kimberly Murray as independent special interlocutor for missing children and unmarked graves and burial sites associated with Indian residential schools.
There are children buried on the grounds of Indian residential school, and we need to find them, and we need to know who they are.
We will survive, and we will strive to see our children grow.
We have to educate our younger generation of the pain, the suffering, the loneliness that we went through.
We are all human beings. That's what we say in our language to everyone, no matter where you come from. We are all people. We are one nation in this land.
Any culture in the world, be proud of your own culture.
We are just starting to heal. We're starting to talk. We're finding our voices. It wasn't easy for any survivor to find our voices.
I can consider every one of the survivors a big miracle. No matter how much tragedy, you're just like a diamond, precious and can't be broken.
What we are carrying through life from the residential schools is a very heavy burden.
When someone is talking to you and sharing with you, they're sharing a part of who they are. Let's put our minds and our hearts together and build a future for our children, a good future.
What we're suggesting is a formation of a team composed of forensic medical examiners, archaeologists, anthropologists, spiritual leaders working in tandem in order to identify the remains of those children who will be found. We have to take an active control over the processes under which those investigations take place.
When I look at this audience, particularly at the young people, I'm reassured that our work of reconciliation will continue into the next generation.
I look forward to working with you for the respect and dignity of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis in life and in death. And I also look forward to saying the hard truths to this country together.
I want to close with this quote from DeAndre Thomas Hart. They scattered us almost like beads. And now we are picking ourselves up one by one. We are color sorting ourselves. We are restringing them along. We are creating our own design, rebuilding our nations.
There's an awakening happening from nation to nation, and youth, such as yourselves, are the ones that will be leading the way.
Don't let your fires go out. Don't lose your languages. Don't let the ceremonies die.
So in closing, I wanted to say in Creek, I boomi, which means don't give up.
Be strong as you continue to tell your truth. Be strong as you continue to fight.
I'd like to thank each and every one of you for all of the wonderful work that you do for all of the survivors, for our communities, for our families.
As I said, that video was from 6 of the national gatherings that I held across the country. And you can see from the video how important it was for us to include the voices of survivors and youth. I had a youth council and I had an elders council, survivor council that guided me in the work that I was doing and created our guiding principles, which are in my final report if you want to read them there. I'm not going to speak about them today. I guess I do the next slide? Yeah. So what I wanted to spend some time, I know that video is difficult to watch, and I'm going to share some more difficult truths with you. And I'm going to start with the Sites of Truth, Sites of Conscience volume of my final report. I released this in, it was July 2024, and it only has 3 chapters. It was meant to be the first 3 chapters of my final report, but then when I needed an extension to finish the writing and the translation of the full report, I decided that I would bundle these 3 chapters together. And I'm so glad I did, because it's really a history volume, and it's about sharing the truths about the burials at the different locations and sites. In the report, it has the evidence of genocide and crimes against humanity that were perpetrated against the children. It shows that the cemeteries were part of the Indian residential schools from the outset, and that the government planned for the deaths of the children before they even came to the institutions. The evidence shows how the federal government and the churches dehumanized, as you heard Nathan say, the children in life and after death. I want to read a passage from Sites of Truth, Sites of Conscience, to give you an idea about what this volume covers. The buildings, burial grounds, and cemeteries on the sites of former Indian residential schools are etched deeply in survivors' memories. Once places of silence and suffering, they are now sites of truth. Once places of brutal violence and genocide, they are now sites of conscience. Survivors can never forget the memories of trauma and death held in these sites. Now Canada and all Canadians must do so as well. A site of conscience holds truths about the past and memories of injustice that must be exposed, acknowledged, remembered, shared, and learned from so it can never happen again. When the children died, government and church officials often did not return the children to their families and their communities for burial. They were buried instead in cemeteries at the institutions, often in unmarked and mass graves that were sometimes dug by the other children. Many of these cemeteries and burial sites were neglected, abandoned, and left unprotected. This volume of my report focuses on the documented Indian residential school cemeteries and burial grounds where Indigenous children are known to be buried. I included 20 representative examples of these cemeteries, and it includes images of the cemeteries. It includes images of the blueprints when they were creating the institution that they planned to put a cemetery on the site. And it includes images of letters that were written between the principal and the Indian agent saying, the cemetery's full, we're gonna have to now bury the children across the laneway. So we have an enormous amount of evidence, in addition to survivor testimony, the living witnesses that have been speaking these truths for decades, long before the TRC wrote about it. And yet we still have a rise in denialism. And so it was important for me to release this report as an antidote to the denialism that exists in this country. Once the Indian residential schools were closed, the government made no plans to protect or maintain the cemeteries. And as a result, many of the cemeteries are abandoned. They fell into disrepair and became vulnerable to disturbances and desecration. And so that lack of taking care of the cemeteries by the federal government and the churches has effectively hidden the burials from community members and from the public generally. The Sites of Truth, Sites of Conscience report also shows and highlights how the Indian residential schools intersected with many other institutions. So parents and communities were often not informed when their children were transferred from one Indian residential school to another, often outside of the province. I'm doing some work right now in Manitoba, tracing the children that were taken out of Manitoba to other provinces and had died in these other provinces. And what I'm finding is that more people, Indigenous people from Ontario, were taken to Manitoba and died in the institutions there, and are buried in Manitoba in unmarked graves. Also, children were transferred between the residential schools and then to Indian hospitals, TB sanatorium, provincial reformatories, homes for unwed moms. The list is very long, and this report tries to capture some of those other institutions in the 3 chapters that it's included. So I really wanted Canadians to really understand the scope and scale of the wrongdoing that was done to Indigenous children and families, and to highlight the need for full reparations in this country. The Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement was not full reparations. It did not include all the institutions where children were taken. It only recognized certain boarding schools or institutions. You saw in that video 2 survivors from the Isle à la Crosse Indian boarding school, which is in Saskatchewan. They've been fighting for decades to have that institution added to the settlement agreement, and Canada said, no, we didn't pay for it. It was the province. And the province said, nope, we're not responsible, and they were just pointing fingers at each other. They have a class action lawsuit. You may have saw yesterday, Saskatchewan finally apologized. So that gives me hope. I'm gonna call those survivors. I'm gonna call Louis when I'm in my car on my way back to Toronto to see how he felt about yesterday. But there's all these other institutions that have not been recognized, where children were taken to. Their parents didn't know they were taken there, they died there, and they're buried either on the grounds of the institution or in cemeteries that are close to the institution. And so I'm gonna show you some of the examples from this report with some of the photos. So. Oh, I already talked about this. Here we go. So this is Lejac. The Lejac Indian Residential School operated from 1922 until 1976. It was operated by a Catholic entity. There are at least 2 known cemeteries where children were buried at this institution. During the span of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, we were able to identify 39 deaths of children at LeJac, but we know that this number is going to be higher and is higher because at the time of the TRC doing this work, we had limited access to records. And now communities that are doing the searches are getting far more access to records, whether it's at Library and Archives Canada, church archives, provincial archives, university archives. They're really able to find more and more information about the deaths of the children. So you can see in this top, at the top of the screen, these are actually two documents. The top is an example of what we see in death certificates across the country. This one's from British Columbia. And you can see clearly in this death certificate, and I've redacted the child's name and name of people in this document, that this child's buried at the LeJac Res School. It's clear as day. You know, those deniers that say there's no cemeteries on the sites of residential school, we have hundreds and hundreds of death certificates that say children are buried on the grounds of the Indian residential school. And so this is just one example. I have some other examples in my report. The bottom part of this photo of this image is of one of the cemeteries. And I included this there. So this is one of the LeJac cemeteries. Because I wanted you to see the wooden crosses of the the wooden crosses that were placed in some of the cemeteries and the wooden fences. And those are gone now, making it very difficult for communities to know where the cemetery is, where the full parameter of the cemetery is, the boundaries. And so that's the work that they're doing with the ground penetrating radar and the historical human detection dogs and other types of technology that we have, the S4 and LiDAR, and I have a whole chapter on that if you're like a techie person and you want to read about the technology. But that's why it's so difficult in many places. These crosses are gone, the fences are gone, people have died, and there's no memory. And so communities have to get access to records, the historical records, to try and map out where the cemeteries are located. Remember, these were children. So the living witnesses now that are 60, 70, 80, 90, they remember that there might have been a cemetery, and they're like, it was over here. But the grounds have changed now, all these years later. And so pinpointing exactly where they're located is the work that survivors have been doing. I just want to let you know that at this Indian residential school, there are survivors that testified that they witnessed the burials from the first cemetery being moved into the second cemetery in 1951. So that's how we know that there are two locations where children were buried, because people actually witnessed the exhumation and the reburial of the children. So this image you saw in the video, this is Dunbow, Alberta, the Dunbow Indian Industrial School. The deaths of at least 73 children are associated with Dunbow. Many children were buried in the institution's graveyard. In some cases, children were buried 2 to 3 in one coffin. Children were forced to work in the Dunbow Cemetery, as seen in this photograph. And this was the case at many of the Indian residential schools and also at the Indian hospitals. And so it's documented proof that the children were 2 to 3 in a coffin. There's records at Library and Archives Canada where people are writing about that. And also that the children were the ones that had to dig the graves for the other children. When Dunbow was shut down in 1922, the federal government failed to maintain the cemetery like many others. And there's a letter from July 1936 where the Department of Indian Affairs writes that, and this is a quote, "The graveyard there was being trampled over by cattle, and that they had knocked all the crosses down, and that the cemetery was in terrible shape. So this cemetery was located on the banks of the Highwood River. And in 1996, the burials, so this is before TRC, the TRC writes about this example. In 1996, the burials of the children were exposed when the river overflowed. In some instances, children's remains were washed away by the floodwaters. The remains of several of the children originally buried in the cemetery are still in the river. And in 2001, the Tsuut'ina Nation Cultural Museum, with the guidance of elders, were able to relocate the burials of 34 children. And the children were reinterred at a nearby site from the original cemetery, but away from the river. And that site's now protected with a proper fence, and they have put a commemorative cairn to recognize and memorialize the children that were buried there. Okay, so this is Maryvale in Saskatchewan. Some of you might recall that when Kamloops announced the 215 possible burials at the Kamloops Indian Residential School, Cowessess First Nation, like a week or two after, announced the work that they had been doing to identify burials at the Maryvale institution. And they identified 751 possible burials. This is a historical photograph of that cemetery. Those crosses don't exist anymore if you go to Cowessess and you go here and visit. This was a mission cemetery, so there are both Indigenous and non-Indigenous people buried in this cemetery. And so the community that's been doing the ground search is trying to find, again, the boundaries of the full cemetery and identify exactly where all the individual burials are. They have, last update I got on the work they were doing, they had identified over 300 of the people that are buried in the cemetery by records, because they've been working with the church to try and find all the records in relation to the people buried there. There's oral history from community members that indicate that the grave markers that you see in this photo were removed at the instigation of a local priest. This act erased important information about where the children are buried. And a survivor of Maryvale, one of our living witnesses, remembers that he and other children saw workers arriving in a truck to remove the headstones and wooden crosses from a section of the cemetery in the early 1960s. So this, again, this purposeful removal of the headstones and the crosses so we wouldn't know where the burials were. This one's probably hard to see from, if I had a pointer, I would point. So this is closer to home. This is Shingwak in Sault Ste. Marie. Oh, I do have a pointer. So this is Shingwak up in Sault Ste. Marie. And so a cemetery on the grounds of the Shingwak Institute. Actually, community members from my community were taken to Shingwak and also to Spanish, not too far from here, and are buried up in Shingwak. So let me go back to my speaking notes. A cemetery on the grounds of the Shingwak Institution was part of the principal's plans even before the first child died there. In an 1876 note, the principal wrote and published in the Algoma Missionary News that he had, and this is the quote, "Set apart God's acre, a little spot, retired, peaceful on a gentle slope, near to a little lake, surrounded by a thick growth of young fir trees and birch. It is only a chain square, and our boys have built a stone wall around it." This is, I guess I have to do it at all four. This is the cemetery right here in this blueprint. The survivors of Shingwak Kitigan-Zibi Garden River are working to do the search, both at on the grounds of, which is now Algoma University, but also Wawanash, which was the girls' home before the Shingwak Institute was opened. Okay, so this is a sketch of the Edmonton Indian Residential School, also known as Poundmaker. It's a Department of Indian Affairs hand-drawn diagram showing the institution grounds and the location of the graveyard at the residential school. This one's clearer, it's in blue. An appraisal document dated 1970 noted that, again, this is a quote, "There is a small graveyard just west of the building and garden site on the former Indian residential school property and along the south boundary of this property. It covers approximately 100 by 12 feet." So in 1971, Canada, when I say Canada, I mean the federal government, transferred the land where the cemetery is located to the province of Alberta. In 1979, the land was then transferred to the city of St. Albert. And so we see this across the country at a number of sites where the land's being transferred along with the cemetery. Sometimes they tell when they do the transfer that there's a cemetery, and sometimes they don't, which is making it very difficult for communities to access lands. So when this land was transferred to the city of St. Albert, which is just outside Edmonton for people that aren't aware, the city annexed the cemetery to some adjacent land and created a municipal cemetery. So many children are buried in this cemetery, and many of the children buried in the cemetery are from not just the residential school, but from the Charles Camsell Indian Hospital, which was in Edmonton. And I'm going to speak about that in a little bit. So again, chapter 1 of my Sites of Truth, Sites of Conscience has 20 examples of cemeteries with those images and photos. Chapter 3 of my report speaks about all these other institutions and programs. And so I write about what was known as the working out system. In today's language, we call it human trafficking. And so beginning in the late 19th century, Canada adopted the working out, or also known as the outing system. It was originally developed in the Indian boarding schools in the United States. And so children and youth of all ages were trafficked from Indian residential schools to perform manual labor. They were forced to live and work in homes, on farms, and in businesses. Their work placements were always brokered by the Indian agent or the principal or the principal of the Indian residential school. Under the outing system, children were sometimes provided with room and board and a very small wage for their labor. Although they may have received a small wage, the use of their money was scrutinized and controlled by the Department of Indian Affairs. The federal government held the children's earnings in a savings account, which I tried to access from Canada Post, because we used to have Canada Post bank accounts. Canada Post would not give us access to the records when I was working at the TRC. Shame on Canada Post. But these earnings were deposited in these savings account, and the Department of Indian Affairs used its control over the accounts as leverage to keep the children at the institutions, saying that if they ran away, if they left, that they would not get their money. I'm convinced that the children still didn't get their money even once they were released from the institution, and something that if there's an academic in the room that wants to research that, I'm pretty confident what we're going to find if we do that research. Although the outing system, the practice of sending the children and youth to work out was becoming less common in the early 20th century, Canada, the federal government, continued to be involved in this area and would continue its involvement well into the 20th century. This is Kokwalitsa Indian Hospital. Again, this one's in British Columbia. Just as the Indian residential schools, the government's decisions around death and burials were always based on prioritizing cost control. And so government officials always sought out the least expensive burial for Indigenous patients from the Indian hospitals, which included children that were taken there from Indian residential schools. As an example, at the Charles Camsell Indian Hospital in Edmonton that I spoke about earlier, the patients were buried on the grounds of the Edmonton Indian Residential School, and the children from the residential school were required to dig the graves of the patients that died in the Indian hospital. When I was working with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, we heard many testimonies from the living witnesses about the fact that they were those children that had to dig those graves for the Indian hospital. It was a practice at many of the institutions. Okay, I think no, it's not the last one. Two more. This one bothers me a lot. So this is the Cecil Butters Memorial Hospital. It's a privately owned hospital, or was a privately owned hospital in the eastern townships of Montreal, kind of like the Muskoka of Montreal. It originally opened in 1947. Several Indigenous children were known to have been placed at the Cecil Butters Memorial Hospital by the Department of Indian Affairs from all across Canada, from the far north, from northern Manitoba. I was able to find a 1962 report on this institution that identified that there was a really high death rate at the institution. It was meant to be a home for children with disabilities. The report that we found from 1962 notes that Lily Butters, who was the owner of the hospital, was, and this is a direct quote, so excuse my language, it's quite racist and derogatory, that Lily Butters was cooperating with a Boston doctor who was conducting experiments on the Mongoloid children. The children that died at this institution are buried in unmarked and mass graves. I write about two or three of the children that are buried there. I know of many. I think I wrote about two. Mary Von Aklevic is buried in a grave with up to 30 other children, and her mom can't bring her home up to her community in the north because we need to figure out who the other children are and get consent of those families to do the exhumation. I personally attended a number of the cemeteries that are associated with this institution, and I actually got to speak to some of the local residents about the institution. I was told that in addition to the three cemeteries that are depicted in these photos, that there are two other areas where children are buried from this institution, and neither of those two other areas are protected as cemeteries. They're just exposed, open to desecration, development. So this is a big problem that we have in the country. We don't have laws, proper legislation provincially or federally to protect the burials of our ancestors, Indigenous ancestors. I just want to note that even though Canada sent the children to this institution, I'm not sure why. Another research, I think people could dig deeper into this institution. I'm still trying to figure out who the Boston doctor was that was conducting the experiments. What was I going to say? I lost my train of thought. Canada, even though they paid to send the children to this institution, they paid Lily Butters to keep the kids at this institution. they paid like $1 or $2 more than the province did. So I think that the institution was actually trying to target Indigenous kids because they would get paid more. There were also American Indians that were brought up to this institution and died there. I've been trying to connect with the Indian boarding school folks and let them know. I actually wrote a few letters before my mandate ended about that. Canada has refused to pay to help families bring their children home from these cemeteries. And because they say that they died not at an Indian residential school. Even though the children, a couple of the children that I helped find were transferred to this institution from an Indian residential school, and always on the consent and written authority of the Indian agent, and paid for by Canada. Okay, so this is the last example from Sites of Truth, Sites of Conscience. This is George Painter. He's one of the boys that was accused and eventually convicted of setting a fatal fire at the Cross Lake Indian Residential School, which was in northern Manitoba. George was 7 years old when he was sent to Cross Lake Indian Residential School and remained there until the time of the fire, which is about 9-10 years after the time he had been brought to the residential school. Before the fire, George had tried to escape from the institution many times. There's records of his escape, but he was always caught and brought back and severely punished. So George was charged with setting the fire, and his case was heard in adult court. Canada, the federal government, did not provide him with a lawyer. He pled guilty and was given the maximum sentence, which was life in prison. On October 27th, 1931, George was admitted to the Stony Mountain Penitentiary to serve his life sentence. And then in 1939, George's father attempted to have his case reviewed and to have him paroled. But the Department of Indian Affairs would not support his parole application and actually fought against it, and so he was never released. George died in the Winnipeg General Hospital on February 20th, 1947. He was 32 years old when he died, having spent half of his life in prison and the first part of his life in an Indian residential school. George is buried in the prison cemetery, where many other Indigenous people are buried, and their burials are marked only with numbers and no names or crosses or headstones. So I'm going to switch gears and talk about a little bit about the final report that I released in November. It's called Upholding Sacred Obligations, and it includes 2 volumes, and it's very long, and I apologize. At least I encourage you to read the executive summary. But I do want to speak, so I identified 42 obligations. I was supposed to make recommendations, and I decided that governments mostly don't implement recommendations. I mean, sometimes they do, but very rarely. And so when I was writing the report, I worked with the writers and I said, you know, I want to identify the legal obligations that Canada has as a state, and the churches have the legal, moral, and ethical obligations to do the right thing. And so a lot of the report is based in international law and international legal obligations that the state has. And one of the things that I write a lot about, and you heard me say at the beginning, I said missing and disappeared children. And so in the first part of my report, I write about enforced disappearances. And so I write that there's an important distinction between the term missing. So the TRC's final report has a volume on missing children and unmarked graves. When I reflect on that, and I was part of that report, that term was not created by the TRC. That term, missing children and unmarked burials, came from a committee that was established by Canada. And so before the TRC was created, there was this committee of government, the Assembly of First Nations, and church officials that were working to identify the kids that died in Indian residential schools. And that was the name of their committee. And that term just sort of carried forward. It was adopted by the TRC, and because that's what it was known by. And so when I started to do my final report and started looking at international law, to me, these children aren't just missing, they've been disappeared by the state. By using the term disappeared, and it identifies the culpability and responsibility of the government. If we say they're just missing, somehow it places that on the families, on the children, they went missing. But if they were disappeared, that is an action by the state and the churches that they purposely disappeared these children. And so I make that argument in my final report. How's my time? I'm good, okay. So what I say, and I'm gonna go back to my script, otherwise I'll be here all day. The children did not just vanish. They were not disappeared by accident. The forced removal and transfer of Indigenous children was Canadian law and policy. Those in charge of these institutions knew that the children's chances of surviving were low. That's why they created cemeteries. They exposed the children to diseases that killed them. They refused to provide them with enough food. They refused to provide them with medical attention. And they permitted non-consensual human experimentation to be done on them while they were in the institutions. I have a chapter on experiments in my final report, an area that I think we need to do further investigation in. So I argue that enforced disappearances is a violation of international human rights law, that they are an offense to human dignity and a violation of a person's right to not be subjected to torture or other cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatment or punishment. They're also a violation of the right to liberty and the security of the person. So for the international human rights violation of enforced disappearances, there's like 3 elements. This is the lawyer in me now, I'm sorry. You're all gonna fall asleep when I get all legal, but there has to be a deprivation of liberty, right? That happened. Deprivation of liberty of these children. Their liberty was deprived. It was state policy to take them from their families. It has to be state authorized or supported. That was the Indian Act. The Indian Act said, take the kids from their families and deprive them of their liberty. And then there also has to exist a refusal to acknowledge the disappearances, or there is a concealment of the fate or whereabouts of the disappeared person. All right. Library and Archives Canada, access to information laws, the vault where the records are, the churches refusing to give records to Indigenous people, to communities, to families, to try and find where their children are, to trace them. That is hiding, concealing the fate of the children. Not providing medical records of the children, and there were some. Protecting it through colonial laws. There's no Indigenous data sovereignty over records regarding our own people, our children, our communities. Canada is concealing the fate of these children. So when Tk'emlúps happened, there was a group of lawyers, like what the way lawyers do, they wrote a letter to the International Criminal Court. And enforced disappearances in the Rome Statute. It's also a criminal offense if you disappear people. And Canada signed the Rome Statute. We have crimes against humanity legislation in Canada, but we didn't include enforced disappearances in our own domestic law because Canada knew that it disappeared people. So the International Criminal Court refused to take jurisdiction, refused to come to Canada to investigate the children's burials and the disappearances because they said that they can't investigate crimes that happened before the court was created. And that's generally true. under international law. But the thing is, and I make this argument in my report, it's just me and a whole bunch of other academic, way smarter than me, that believe this, see, the thing about enforced disappearance, it's an ongoing crime. It continues as long as the concealment of the fate and the whereabouts of the child is not known, or the disappeared person. And so I say the International Criminal Court got it wrong, that the crime continues in Canada. And maybe you've heard me say this, I say it all the time, you're probably bored of me saying it, but I say Canada committed the crime yesterday, it's committing the crime today, and it's going to commit it again tomorrow, because it's not providing proper resources to communities to do the searches. It's not providing access to the records that communities need to find and trace where the children are. It continues to commit this crime. So it's not only a crime against humanity that the International Criminal Court should be investigating, it's also an international breach of human rights to disappear the children. So that's a big chunk of my final report. As I said, I identified 42 obligations. I don't have time to talk about all of them, but I'm going to talk about this one. I said that because Canada disappeared these children, they have an international obligation to facilitate thorough investigations. And Canada can't investigate itself, right? They're the perpetrator. We can't have the RCMP investigate. The RCMP took the children. They were the ones that were taking the children. George Painter, every time he ran away from that residential school before he burned it down, was brought back by the RCMP. We can't have the RCMP investigate. So communities are doing Indigenous-led investigations, but I say they need some support, financial support, and they also need technical support. And so I make this suggestion in my obligations that the state has an obligation to create a commission of investigation into missing and disappeared Indigenous children and their unmarked burials. And I identify it should be created by legislation, it should last at least 20 years, because think about all those institutions that I talked about and sites of truth, sites of conscience, those need to be researched and investigated as well. And we have to have Indigenous laws govern the work of the commission. We can't have colonial laws. They haven't worked. Chapter 8 of my report talks about all the failed investigations that the police did when communities complained about the abuses and the deaths that were happening in the residential schools. So it needs to be governed by Indigenous law. And it also has to have the ability to examine the patterns of genocide and crimes against humanity across the country. Because these residential schools were scattered all over, these institutions were scattered all over, and someone has to have sort of that helicopter view of what happened and what is happening for us to be able to continue to identify the genocide and the crimes against humanity that happened. Over the 2.5 years where I traveled into communities and I heard from survivors in communities, it became apparent to me that not just the Indian residential schools need to be investigated for deaths and missing and disappeared children and unmarked burials. And so this is a letter, you can't really see it because it's too far away. It's in the report. But it's just an example. It's proof that a child was sent from an Indian residential school. In this case, it's the Mount Elgin Residential School here in Ontario, in southern Ontario, and was sent to Mimico Reformatory. So there's lots and lots of examples in the records of kids being sent to these types of institutions. There's letters of parents saying, where's my son? Where's my son? I want him to come home. And then we find out, if we follow the truth in the records, we find that they were sent to a reformatory or a prison, and the family was never told. And the thing is, kids would be sent to these reformatories. There was no due process. The Indian agent did it. It was sometimes a judge did. I already trashed some judges this week, so I won't today. But sometimes judges did. But most of the time is the Indian agent. And there was no term. It was like this sentence, this child sentenced to go to reformatory, to a penitentiary, and there's no like date to let them out. And that was our law back then across the country in different states, provinces. I also think that a commission of investigation, as I mentioned, needs to investigate, and more work needs to be done into looking at the human experiments that happen in the institutions. This slide here just has, they're just photos of some of the studies that were published. I write and I have some obligations directed at universities because professors, doctors, I'm going to name a few of the universities, McGill, U of T, U of A, were heavily involved in these type of experiments, experimentation on the children. There was a committee that was set up where they would meet and talk about what will we experiment next? What study will we do next on the kids in residential schools? And so we have some academics that have, Ian Mosby's written a lot about the nutritional experiments. I think there needs to be more examination. The problem is getting access to the records. And so academics, doctors, universities have developed their careers and furthered their careers on these unconsensual medical experimentation that were happening on the children, and the parents never knew. And the children didn't know what was happening to them. So I think that needs to be more further investigated. I thought I had a slide on it, but I don't. The final thing that I would say we haven't investigated, and you heard it in the video, the issue and the tragedy of the deaths of babies. I want to say the deaths and the stealing of babies, because not only did I hear about babies dying in the institutions and the incinerators, coast to coast to coast we heard that. The TRC heard it over and over again, and I heard it over and over again. But I also heard about babies being stolen and taken on ships. I heard that a lot from Inuit. And just anyone could go look at the passenger manifests of the ships. I poked my nose in a couple. And, they list the name of the passenger on the ship and what they do. Carpenter, or anyway. When I see somebody who's a priest, a clergyman, a nun, traveling with babies over to Europe, it's starting to make sense to me now when I hear what I've heard from the Inuit. And Nathan Obed, who you saw in the video, has actually gone over a couple of times on this very issue of trying to find out what happened to these children that were taken, these babies that were taken and presumably adopted to white families in Europe. We know that happened from Europe to here in the United States, in the homes for unwed mothers in Ireland. It makes complete sense when I hear from the living witnesses that it happened in Canada. So my final report, my 42 obligations, are about an Indigenous-led reparation framework, which has many components. I can't talk about them all. Some of them I captured in my stories that I shared today. But just to say this, we have no legislation to protect the burials of the children. We have no legislation to repatriate the children, to bring them home. You may have saw the story of Percy O'Nabagon on the National. I didn't see it, but I know it was on the National this week. I don't know if it was last night. He has finally been reburied. We found him in Woodstock. taken from a residential school down to sick kids who wouldn't accept him into the hospital and sent him to the mental asylum, as it was then known. He was bounced around between different institutions. He ended up in Woodstock in a hospital for people with epilepsy. He died there as an adult, and now he's finally brought home, and it took the family decades to do that. No family should have to go through that battle. Canada refused to pay to bring Percy home, even though they paid to bring him down to Southern Ontario and put him in these institutions. It was actually Doug Ford that paid to exhume his body and repatriate him. And he's now laid to rest with his ancestors. No family should have to go through that. So those are some of the things I speak about in the final report. And then I'm going to end on this, and I'll open up to questions. The last chapter of my final report talks about becoming upstanders to reconciliation. And so in my interim report, I called the federal government a bystander to reconciliation. And I continue to think they're bystanders to reconciliation. When I think about every time a community makes any kind of announcement about the death, the disappearance, the burials of children at Indian residential schools or other institutions, and the denialism comes out, and the people write these nasty newspaper articles in a newspaper that I won't mention, that I will never buy. Where's Canada? Where are the churches? They never speak up. They never speak up, even though they are holding the evidence that I just showed you in their archives. They never speak up and stand with survivors and communities. And so I say they're bystanders, and I encourage everyone to not be bystanders to reconciliation, but to become upstanders to reconciliation. So to educate yourselves, to speak up against those deniers, and to take leadership roles in whatever position you have. If you're a student, do research in this area, write your thesis, and do further. There's so many PhD dissertations that I used in my final report. Each of these institutions needs to be examined very closely. And we don't have full written reports on each of the institution. And so I'll just close by saying, I'm happy to see what Laurentian's been doing. I will call you an upstander to reconciliation. I know that there's a lot more work still to be done, and I'm sure the community feels that way as well, but you're doing something. And so I applaud you for that, and I encourage you to continue to talk with communities and elders and survivors and keep moving forward with reconciliation. So with that, I'll end. I'll say nawe miigwech, and I'm happy to take questions if there's time. Thank you. Okay. All right. Don't be shy.
Hello, Ani. Ani, I'm curious about the care work that was put in for the survivors and the witnesses, because I think a lot of this discussion's it can be so harmful, and it's bringing up all these things, and I think about all of the hard work that Indigenous people are doing to make these reports and these recommendations and obligations. I really like that word. So I'm thinking about the care work that was done afterwards for those people that shared their stories and continue to put in that work today.
Yeah, miigwech for that really important question. So all of our gathering, well, first of all, when I went into communities, they always had the ceremonies that were needed before we had our conversations and our dialogue. At my national gatherings, I always worked with the local community and protocols around the health supports that were needed, and ceremony was everywhere. my first national gathering was in Edmonton, and it was the first one. And I would say, you can watch the video, because at the end I'm actually apologizing to the group, saying we didn't have enough ceremony at this national gathering. And so from that day forward, everything was based in ceremony. I had many elders working with me. And then after as well, keeping in contact. And so each of my gatherings, I did a summary report. And there's photos of people, and they're quoted. I made sure that there was proper consent from all those individuals that were, their photos were in my report, and I quoted them, and I wanted to make sure that they were okay with that. On the sites of truth, sites of conscience, I just wanted, because this was a really difficult decision for me, about the photographs. Because, like you saw in the video where when I was first announced, the very first question I got from media was pretty much from a denier. And I said, I've seen the photos, because I worked at the TRC and we collected the records that are now at the National Center. But they're buried at the National Center in their archive. And so it was, someone's talking to her as I'm answering the question. It was a really difficult decision to put those photos, but I worked with the elders and my Survivor Advisory Council, and they said, it's time. It's time that we show those images, because community members have been living with this trauma, and they're the living witnesses who have passed that information on to their children and grandchildren. But it's time for Canada to see it and stop hiding it in the archives. And so that direction came from the survivors and elders, because I was really nervous about putting those images for exactly what you're identifying. And of course, as soon as I released the report, all the media did was put images of those photos in their newscast instead of speaking to witnesses. And but we knew that would happen. But Murray always used to say, Murray Sinclair, the late Murray Sinclair, we used to have many conversations about moving people from their head to their heart, and making people feel. And sometimes, like, the testimony and the photos make people feel it. When I first started working at the TRC, I was hired, before I became the executive director, I was hired to set up statement gathering. And our very first national gathering, national event in Winnipeg, I could not believe how many survivors wanted to be on the stage to share their truth on camera and recorded. I thought for sure the majority would want to do it in private, and for it to not be public, but they wanted to tell their truths. That's why they had insisted on a truth commission under the settlement agreement. But yes, so ceremony, sacred fires, medicines are really important when we have these difficult conversations, and I always carry my medicine in my pocket. So, miigwech.
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Teresa from the community of Sudbury. Thank you so much for such a riveting talk. And I was just reflecting on the last thing you just said, and it just made me think, for myself, I can see how I'm moving all of this from my heart actually to my head, because I think that's the intentionality piece that we're seeing from Laurentian is amazing. Mm-hmm. But what I wanted to actually get into more of a technical part, I'm really, really fascinated by the genealogy piece. So we talk about babies that were shipped, sent to Europe, and we also talk about finding, people's burial and then connecting it to communities. Can you just get a little practical with me? Like, how are we actually, like, what's the science between how we're connecting communities? Are people voluntarily self-identifying? Is there like a DNA database? I'm just so fascinated by how all the connections are being made.
So there are conversations in the community around creating an Indigenous DNA database for this exact purpose. But there is technology. There's eDNA that can be done. And so when I talked about Percio Nabagon, the family did contribute DNA to to make sure that when they exhumed Percy, it was Percy. And so right now we don't have a database. There are some projects happening in British Columbia where they're partnering with a university to put their DNA in a database that is, you know, they have really strict protocols and rules around the university archive of that DNA. So Canada, when I was the interlocutor, tried to get the, I forget their name now, the Missing Persons Commission, which is not a UN body, but they like to pretend they're a UN body, to come and do consultation around a DNA data bank. But they didn't do the process properly. They didn't consult with Indigenous people. And so there is a need, and I write about this, for communities to lead that work. Because nobody wants to put their DNA in an RCMP database or a federal government database. And Canada was trying to create its own DNA strategy. It needs to be an Indigenous-led DNA strategy. And it's not likely to be a national one. It's likely to be regional. That communities are doing that work with various partners that they trust.
Miigwech, Kimberly Marie, for your speech and for giving us the knowledge that we know today. So, miigwech. Thank you.
Miigwech, Kimberly. I think quite often we focus on the reconciliation part of truth and reconciliation. And today there were truths, I think, that many of us heard for the very first time. And as this continues and the work continues in this, I think we're going to hear more truths until the work that we do is truth knowledge that undergirds our reconciliation efforts. So to close out this section, and before I do, I want to remind everybody that at 1 p.m. that we are moving upstairs onto the second floor to have the ribbon cutting for the opening of the Mamazing space, which is quite an exciting moment for us here at Laurentian, that Mamazing has a visible space to call their own. I'm going to share that I'm a member of the Mishkigaguming First Nation, and I spent the early years of my life living on the land, or what we affectionately call it, the bush. And I spoke our language up until I went to school, English school in Thunder Bay, and we spoke Ojibwe in my community. So I'm not originally from this territory, and I want to acknowledge that I have benefited from living on the traditional territory of the Atikamekw, Anishinaabeg, and the Wanapitei First Nation. Traditionally, people open with a land acknowledgement. And I think there's a danger sometimes in it becoming a checkbox, that it is not meaningful to us. So I actually do, Kimberly, think that things happen for a reason, and that the report card went first, because it reminds us all of how much we have benefited from living on this land, and that Kimberly shared with us the truth, that historical portion of the land that we live on. And so when we acknowledge that land, we have to bring that truth with us to say how much we have benefited, how much we acknowledge the people of this territory. So I just want to say that this is something that we really need to do, is when we're saying land acknowledgements, that we fully understand the land in which we are acknowledging. miigwech for coming out and spending this part of the day with us. Now we are going to move to lunch and have an opportunity for people to reflect and share with each other some of the things and the understandings that you've learned here today. We have several locations for which you can take your lunch. We're going to ask you to do a lineup. Somebody will be serving you portions. We have, if you want to be outside, we have a nice area out there for you to have your lunch, and we also had put up and set up tables in the atrium. And we do have a few tables here in the lounge as well. So again, I want to thank everybody who shared with us today in this portion as we move to have lunch, a little break, and then regather again on the second floor. Miigwech. Just as a reminder, we're going to invite up elders first to come into the beginning of the line. Oh, thank you.